Okay. A little public service announcement. I'll be doing this for a few more weeks. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. It's a terrific public service announcement, I think. It takes a while for that to take. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. And today's topic is it's about the dance of evolving from a role to a soul. It's really a dance of personality. How personality and the soul do this dance, and the personality. I want to just sort of open up that whole understanding of personality, and then the roles, the masks that we wear, and why we do that, and then also how does that evolve into living a life of soul. That's sort of the thing today, and it's really about having a vocabulary of soul. We lost that in our culture, unfortunately. It started to get lost in around the 14th century when the Renaissance happened. When every time you gain something, you have potential to lose something, and all the way up to the 18th century, which was known as Renaissance meant the rebirth, and then we had the Age of Enlightenment, so called because we discovered modern science and the roots of that. And little by little, the material world grabbed more and more of our attention, and the other half of this, kind of hybrid life that we as humans live, where we're both material and spiritual, the vocabulary for the spiritual sort of disappeared. So I've been doing a series just to try to get some basic vocabulary. A little bit more about the soul itself. Again, we are a soul that contains body, mind, heart, personality, with all the roles and masks they wear. Roles, masks, it can even become a suit of armor at its worst. And then all of our unconscious material. The soul is a kind of unified field that contains all that is all that. And the soul is also not a noun. It's not like a container. It's ultimately, they talk about neuroplasticity. Well, the ultimate plastic thing that can take any shape at all is the soul. And I remember when I had to memorize the Baltimore Catechism, the bishop could ask you any question, when you're getting confirmed, and you don't want to go blank. And one of the early things is they talked about in the Catholic view, and I think it really connects with everybody, is that there's thought, word, and deed. And everything we think, everything we say, everything we do, which basically that's what the Asians consider karma, it changes the form of your soul. And your soul could either be evolving and expanding or devolving and shrinking moment by moment. And whatever you think, it's like, if you can imagine a kind of still pond, any thought is like just a pebble in there, and the ripples will come out from it. And then if the thought turns into a word that comes out of your mouth, it's like throwing a rock in there, bigger pebbles. And then the deeds would be like a bowl, like a boulder. Each one has a little bit more karmic repercussions and changes your soul. I mean, either in the direction of evolution or devolution, because some people will, unfortunately, it's sad, but some people will come into this life because of what's going on. They'll leave this life where their soul will actually devolve or shrink and whatever. The good news is we're all going to make it, at least the Tibetan good news, we're all going to make it, but depends on how many lifetimes, how much hell we have to go through, because when your soul is shrinking and devolving, you'll bring that back into the next incarnation, according to the Tibetans. And I think that's really intelligent. So everything you think matters. Everything you say matters, even if you're saying it and thinking it in the privacy of your own room. I hope she just falls flat on her face. These kinds of thoughts that we all have, we're responsible for them. The soul imprints all of it. The soul also has all that dark wood unconscious stuff that had to be those parts of ourself that had to be orphaned or exiled so we could survive. See? So anyway, the soul's not a fixed entity. What you hear in this talk today will hopefully help you evolve your soul. Okay. What you do if you have a spiritual practice. And, here's another public service announcement. When you get past midlife, as most of us are, you the best, the most gracious thing that can happen to you is you won by hook or by crook or by whatever. You find a spiritual practice and you start doing it. That's one of the greatest gifts you can have. I look at my altar over here with my spiritual teachers. I thank them every morning. To be in, midlife, aging, going towards that next threshold of death without a spiritual practice of some kind, and all you got is personality, materialism, and your role. I don't wish that on anybody. So that's what we're working at here. Personality, first of all, and the ego is this part of the mind that generates a personality. Persona in Greek meant mask. It was at the old Greek theaters, only men were acting, and so you could put on a mask of a woman if you're the woman character, okay? And they were not only a mask that made you sort of look like a woman, although everybody knew everybody was a man, unless it was a really good play. And it also had a megaphone. It had like a kind of mouthpiece that is sort of like what the cheerleaders on the sideline are using. So it had dual function. So that was a persona. And so personality is a bit like a mask, but it's also a bit like a megaphone, like, look at me, here I am. Okay. And if you don't have some kind of persona, we all get one sort of in our homes, of course. We'll double back to what it's like to be a little baby, becoming a kid, becoming an infant, becoming a kid, going to school. But, I taught for 20 years in 7th and 8th grade. And I'll tell you, and some of you might know this from painful experience, if you don't have some kind of persona, if you don't have some kind of image that the rest of the junior high kids can look at, it's a certain kind of hell. Certain kind of hell. It doesn't matter what it is. You could be a dweeb, you could be a nerd, you could be a chess club guy, you could be a big time athlete, basketball player. That was one of my personas. I was a basketball player, in junior high and then in high school, one of my roles. But it told people who you were. If you're a football player on our football team, if you fumbled the ball in practice, you carried the football all around to all the practices, to all your classes for a whole week. You held the football. You had to write with, hold it with your offhand and write. This is training. You're a football player. You're a cheerleader. My granddaughter has forsaken reading because she has become a cheerleader at 10. I go, well, all right. But it's actually quite fabulous because we don't. It's a creation. It's quite fabulous, and it is a part of an important phase of human development to start to have a role. I want you to really think about the roles you've played throughout your life, and I'll list a life in roles tomorrow for the poem. I want to share that with you today. I want you to work on your own, but I'll give you an example of a role. When I was real young, I was surrounded by women. My grandmother, my mother, my 2 older sisters, and then there was a kind of like a giant shark that was my father, who was normally at work, But when he came home, and if the cook came in drunk and everything went crazy, he brought that all upstairs. We lived over the restaurant. You could hear somebody coming up the steps. It was like everybody was starting looking around like we're these little fish. And my father would come in. We're all there, and he was out. You could tell when he was in a mood. Thank God my father didn't drink, but he was dangerous when he was in a mood. And so you'll see it tomorrow in my kind of list of roles that accumulated during my life was, and I only realized this when I was an adult that this was the role became clear to me. But I just was like a rodeo clown. It's just like when the rider gets thrown off the bull and the bull's ready to, do some damage. The clown comes out and distracts the bull, and then the rider can get out of the corral. Well, that's what I sort of did as a little kid. I would do something stupid. I actually still do that sometimes, and that's how I noticed that. I'd do something stupid and attract my father's attention. Maybe people would laugh, but then my mother would get out of the room. The girls would get out of the room, and then my grandmother could stand up to my father. She was the only one who could, but got the sort of distracted the bull. You see, I didn't realize, but that's a role. Okay, and it went well into adulthood where it should have expired a long time ago when I got out of that situation, but it didn't. So there's those roles that we picked up in our kid life crisis, uh, survival roles, and but they go on even when you're not a kid. Um, that's the interesting thing. Multiple roles are necessary for a human life, and some are fine. I'm still a father. I'm a husband. These roles are still there. They're kind of assigned roles by the culture, and they're not bad. They're not bad, but the roles are all like stuff in your fridge. They all have expiration date. Even if it's the role hangs on all the way till you're lying on your bed, making that threshold. When you're on your bed, going across that threshold, roles don't make any difference anymore. They all will expire. But in life, sometimes they expire. I mean, I have a dear friend now whose long marriage ended when her husband graduated to the next life. So you're not a wife anymore. Now you're a widow. So, and it could happen like you're a wife and then you're a divorcee. The culture calls you that, or you feel that. A divorce. So the roles can change at the drop of a hat, um, and they're meant to. Because the fact that they can change so suddenly like that, one day you're lying in bed with your wife or your husband, and you wake up in the morning and they have passed away. I know people who have lived this life. It's like that. What does that tell you? Well, that tells you shouldn't identify with any role. That's our problem. The roles are not the problem. Uh, the the roles. This is why I had the screensaver of from the old Invisible Man uh, movie where he became invisible, but he was still there. So he would wear a coat, a trench coat, and pants, and he had a hat on. And then he wound these bandages around his face, and then put on some dark sunglasses, uh, so people could relate to him. But really, who he was really was invisible, which is what it means to be a soul. Yeah, a soul will have a body for a while and may have a body again and a mind and a heart. But our essence is invisible, you say. And so we wrap these bandages around ourselves, these rolls around ourselves. Maybe the bandages are actually going over wounds, you know, that we don't even know about. But they're all meant to expire. Yeah, but we do need this as part of development so we can be seen and love and learn from others. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it, but the point is we get identified with it, and then it can be like the Dalai Lama said. He said, in Tibet we love masks. And he said, but after the play, we take them off. He said, you have Halloween where it's okay to wear masks. He says, but then, Halloween can be 365 days of the year. You have to take the mask off. He would do that. He'd have to go to something that had to do with government and politics because he was both the political and the religious head of Tibet. And so he would put that mask on when he had to be the political head of Tibet, and then when he got out of the meeting, he would take that mask off. I mean, maybe he had to do a liturgy, like a Tibetan liturgy, or right. Well, he would put that certain mask on, do it, but when he came back, he took that off. So because no role is who you are. I don't care who it is, President of the United States. It's just a role. It's okay. You could actually use your role to benefit a lot of other people trying to get through this world, or you could misuse your role, but it's just a role and it all ends. See, at one time or another. But again, this idea of unwrapping these roles as we go along, I want to give you that idea that that's part of the whole spiritual journey. The journey of the soul begins when you begin to wonder if you are more than your various roles that you've been playing, especially, you have a great career and, you're maybe a college dean or president of a college or a college teacher. I taught for 30 years, and at 52, I left the classroom and I left that role. It was scary. And so a lot of times when you retire, that role is no longer there. People have a hard time. Well, what should I get up for? Well, you may have ended a certain kind of work, but the great work lies in front of you. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how long you worked at the business, how much money you made, or maybe it was a fiasco. I know somebody now who he was addicted to gambling and gambled away his whole family's income. You can make a mess of it, but that's not who. I mean, that's what he did, but there's something deeper than that. Here's Merton. On the last day of his life, he gave a talk to a bunch of Asian Benedictines and Trappists, mostly Benedictines, nuns, and priests in Bangkok. And a part of the speech, because the Vietnam War was going on right next door, Thailand, and the communists took over Tibet, and they had 6,000 monasteries, and they trashed them all. There's really only 4 left. They burned all the teachings of 700 years. They shot monks, locked them up, stripped them naked, all their robes. And Merton was aware of this. And he was also aware of what was going on in America. And this is just a little bit from that talk. He said, and he's talking to monks, but when he talks about monks, you could just think anybody trying to make this journey of a soul evolving beyond role to who you really are, which is the soul. He says, what is essential in the monastic life is not embedded in buildings, not embedded in clothing. It's not necessarily embedded in a rule. They all followed the Benedictine rule. That was their game plan. It's not necessarily even embedded in a rule what's essential. It is somewhere along the line of something deeper than a role. Merton was a Trappist monk. He was a priest. Those are roles. But he said it's somewhere along the lines of something deeper than a role. He said it's concerned with this business of total inner transformation. That's where Merton was. He was so ahead of his time, speaking from his role as a Catholic priest and Trappist monk. But he really he got it. He said it's something along the lines of this business of total inner transformation. He said there's got to be something deeper than a role. And that's the great work, as Jung would call it, and Joseph Campbell. So you're not out of work. Even if you are unemployed in this world, you're under a overpass or living in a tent, or the refugees on the border have no work right now. They have that work, and some of them find it there, you say. So don't, that's what we're talking about here. That's why I'm here, you know. And it involves, as you're committed to unraveling in a way, to unbinding these bandages and seeing who you really could be. If you, we talk a lot about, the Islamic wisdom where Allah speaks to Muhammad, the prophet, and he's trying to school him. And he says, Muhammad, between you and me, there are 70,000 veils, but between me and you, there are none. It's the same image of veils, masks, uh, layers of bandages on you. It obscures seeing actually what's inside at the very center. That's the problem, because we're always looking outside for who we are, because our role is pitched to these other people outside. You don't need a role if you're, you know, all by yourself on a desert island, you see. But the roles and the personality all have to do with our uh, transactional reality with people, and that's important. It's important. But when you identify with the role, you're going to have some unnecessary suffering, because that role will crumble, because it's not really real. It's sort of real, but it will end at a time, just like everything in the fridge has an expiration date. Say, yeah. Uh, Maybe I'll end with something Jung said, because Jung was onto this. He didn't think we were just sexual drives and the pleasure principle, as Freud sort of got us into, even understanding the language of uh, the unconscious and the conscious, etc. And Jung went with that, and there's more, he said. And this is really a sobering statement by Jung, one of my favorite ones. It comes from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, I think. But he said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. Now, that's interesting when you know a little Latin. I learned this from the Trappists. Uh, uh, Absurdus in Latin meant not to listen. Interesting. And because we're talking about the inner listening now. Again, the Trappists are Benedictines, and the beginning of their rule is listen with the ear of the heart to everything, because the heart hears the deeper resonance of things. It's not interested in the surface. The mind is there to deal with the surface of life. Transactional reality, you got to do it. I mean, you need to have the Zoom thing to get in here. That's a transaction, you know. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's that other vertical level that leads down to your very center, who you are, okay? Uh, and then there's this whole bunch of stuff, even when you go there, that we don't quite see yet, because there's that lower part of ourselves, the unconscious, the darkness, where the early parts of ourself were orphaned. Had to be, you wouldn't have survived. We're exiled, maybe by your family, maybe by Sister Beatrice in the first grade. I remember Sister Beatrice. I remember her name. I remember, boy, I was afraid from beginning to end with the woman. And there were 60 of us. We could have revolted. We could have taken her down. She was just, she wasn't as big a woman, but we were just there like, And then, I had some really good sisters too, who understood the soul. Beatrice was probably young. She was probably just a novice. Can't remember. All right, but yeah, that's sobering to hear that from young people. We will do anything, no matter how absurd, uh, in order to avoid facing our own soul. Interesting. Uh, maybe wrong. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's wrong. But That's his view, and he spent his whole life trying to open up that realm for you. You know, and Joseph Campbell, just the last kind of tidbit that could lead you to actually some real work on this. There's a 5-part thing, and it's on somewhere. It's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something of Joseph Campbell getting together with Bill Moyers for 5 hours, talking about all this stuff: the hero's journey, uh, the soul, myth. It's called The Power of Myth, and it's on. I think it's on Netflix. I have it permanently. I bought it and just have it, so I've watched it many times because you don't get all of Campbell or even Moyers as a great interviewer the first time around. But it's called The Power of Myth, and it's brilliant. It's at George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch, and it's interesting because uh, Campbell said the modern myth is not Zeus and uh, all Mount Olympus stuff. He says the modern myth is he discovered it in the first. By that time, he had seen the first 3 episodes of Star Wars, which actually are episode 4, 5, and 6 for you aficionados. But Darth Vader is, we don't know yet, but he was a juicy young Jedi who could have gone anywhere, and he ended up going to the dark side. And by the time he meets his own son, Luke Skywalker, he's more machine than man. And Campbell thought that was probably the archetypal myth for modern people. The world tries to turn you into a machine. Think of your jobs. Think of just the way we're programmed all the time. Now we got AI staring us in the face. Machines are going to be talking like human beings. But he thought to stay human in an environment that's trying to turn you into more machine than man or woman, that was the myth. And when you follow at least the core 3 uh, uh, episodes there that he was working with, he saw them all. He never went to the theaters, and his kids like, Grandpa, you really got to come see this. This is what you've been talking about your whole life. He had no time for cinema. He was reading all these obscure myths. So they dragged him and they forced him to go see the first one. And he said, my God, he saw it. And he saw all 3 of them as it went on. And he said, this is the myth. How do you remain human, and not only just remain human, but actually become fully human? That's the journey of a soul, you see. Yeah. All right. I think that's enough for today in terms of the using the words.